for you to listen back to should you want to, and we do have a number of apologies because I realise diaries are very busy. So we say there will be a recording of this that you can listen back to or share with colleagues. We'll also attempt to take a couple of screenshots during the webinar for our own future marketing. So if I can ask Andrew particularly, I think we're getting a lot of feedback from you, so if you are able to mute your phone, please. Anybody else, if you mute during the presentation so we don't hear any background noise. You should also see a speech bubble on the top right hand or somewhere on your screen, and you can use this to type any questions that you want to ask, and we'll try and read them out later. Or we can go, if there's not too many people on the call, we can actually allow people to ask them directly. And we'll ask obviously our presenters to answer those for you. So feel free to add them in at any point. So you can see the programme there, and let's make a start. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context and talk about the wider energy landscape for the UK. So in December 2020, the UK government published its white paper, Powering Our Net Zero Future. And since then, you would have been hard pressed to avoid the various webinars, podcasts, discussions around climate change, impacts on this for the UK in terms of the drive to clean energy, announcements about the use of hydrogen as a source of energy, and also a move away from petrol and diesel engines. This is also being brought into sharp focus with the hosting by the UK of COP26 in Glasgow later this year, but also the ongoing challenges being faced by our steelmaking sector as a strategically significant sector and a key part of our sovereign capability. The shift to clean energy represents some clear opportunities for new green jobs, but also raises many questions for the UK manufacturing sector and our wider competitiveness. You may have heard the term carbon leakage, and this is something that government has stated they wish to avoid. Carbon leakage, for the uninitiated, is simply where we meet our carbon targets through shutting down our domestic manufacturing sector. But by doing this, we simply export our carbon footprint by making everything elsewhere. And this is where controls, probably where controls may be more lax and leading to a net greater global environmental impact. The government has stated in their white paper that industry will need to capture its carbon and switch from using fossil fuels to other low carbon alternatives. We can anticipate many further initiatives and investments over the coming months and years as the country grapples with the huge challenges ahead. So one such initiative is the Transforming Foundation Industries Challenge. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes outlining this for you. There is a growing recognition that the foundation industries, and that's metals, ceramics, bulk chemicals, glass, paper and cement, are vital for any modern economy, but face particular challenges around global competitiveness. And note that there is an overt reference to metals in this challenge and not just steel, which we certainly welcome. And we recognise there are opportunities as well as challenges, as foundries can be part of the supply chain for some of these newer sectors. This TFI challenge will develop innovative technology to reduce energy and resource use within the foundation industries, and has up to £66 million to invest in projects, match funding by £83 million from the private sector. The projects will look at new ways to reduce energy waste and energy use, and in a new research facility to accelerate development of promising clean technology to secure jobs and anchoring high value manufacturing. That's stated in the challenge outline. You will all appreciate that a move away from natural gas as a fuel will in itself have significant implications for our sector. What does the future look like for heat treating, melting, plating, drying? What should our businesses be looking at in future proofing their businesses? What kit should they be investing in? A roadmap with capability studies, demonstrators, case studies and collaborative projects will be vital, not just for these processes, but for all of the more energy intensive processes. The TFI will be looking to address this, but we will need to ensure that it is clearly business focused and not just research focused. And this is where we and the sector can help. Certainly we, as the CMF, the Cast Metals Federation, are directly involved through steering groups and advisory panels, and also through the UK Metals Council, which is a grouping of like-minded trade associations from the sector. And we shall be pushing for a roadmap for our sector. So how can foundries and the supply chain get involved? What is the role of the CMF? Over and above what I've mentioned above, we are certainly ensuring that we are well placed to facilitate communications with our members, and would like to invite anyone with ideas for projects that can contribute to the Net Zero Challenge to get in touch with us, as new projects are actively being sought by the fund leaders of the initiative. So at that point, I'm going to pause and I'm going to pass over to Richard Heath, who will start by explaining what the Bref is, to explain the concept of BAT and how these will inform and determine the way that permits to operate are going to be regulated. Before I do, are there any questions at that point if I just pause? Okay, let's press on then. So, Richard, do you want to take over from here?
Okay, thank you very much, Pam. I'm going to briefly cover 6 points to give a little insight into what BAT and BREFs are, and the future of them now the UK is outside of the EU. It's important to understand how they relate to current operations, environmental protection for the future, and decarbonisation towards net zero. So if we look at the first bullet point that's there, well, what is a BREF and what does BAT mean? BREF is the short name for Best Available Techniques Reference Document. A BREF is designed to help achieve integrated pollution prevention control arising from the activities it covers, leading to a high level of protection for the environment. This is its legal basis. More specifically, it provides for a permitting system for certain categories of industrial installations, requiring both operators and regulators to take an integrated overall review of the consuming and polluting potential for any individual installations. The aim of this approach is to improve the management and control of industrial processes to achieve the desired levels of environmental protection. Central to this is the principle that operators should take all preventative measures that are appropriate against pollution, in particular through the application of best available techniques, known as BAT, enabling them to improve their site's environmental performance. BATs are those which are designed and determined to be the best techniques for preventing or minimising emissions from installations and the negative impacts that emissions would have on the environment. They are designed to account for what is both economically and technically viable within a sector. Techniques refers to both the technology that's used and the way the facility is being built, designed, maintained and operated. Now, BAT itself is not actually a new concept. I've just seen something pop up on the screen. BREF is best available techniques reference document. Yeah, BAT's not a new concept. The UK actually came up with the concept of BAT in its Environmental Protection Act in 1990. So BAT has been around for some time now. It's since been used across Europe, where they apply it there through their Integrated Pollution Prevention and Control Directive, which is a sub-directive under the Industrial Emissions Directive. BAT for foundries tends to most significantly appear for those sites that are Part A or Part A2 with their permits. These permits are usually operated by the Environment Agency directly. Parts B, and in Northern Ireland Part C, they tend to be issued and authorised by their local authorities. But all foundries have limits on certain emissions from their sites regardless of the size. These tend to be built into information gathered from the BAT creation or review process, and then built into what's formerly known as the Secretary of State's Guidance and Process Documents. So these are the SGs and PGs that you would see referenced in your permits. The local authorities and the Environment Agency are obligated to take these into account when setting permit conditions. There is a level of flexibility on limit thresholds for the discretion of those who set the permits. And this is primarily where areas of the country are either subject to things such as triple SIs, or there are actions and regulations in place for helping protect the local communities. So these tend to be things known as AQMAs, air quality management areas, and similar things can also apply for water protection too. Now, the UK has always taken positive actions in terms of BAT and BREF at the EU level. It's always been a big contributor on the industry side to the negotiations and the setting of everything, as have the other 27 authorities. Makes sense when we're all working at the same level. The current BREF that applies to foundries dates from 2005 and at present continues to be in effect. However, following Brexit, the UK is now seeking to evolve the BAT regime, so it could look different when our new revision comes through from what's gone before, and it has the potential to diverge from the EU system. Now, the process of realising a BREF document, which is a huge document, the current one's nearly 500 pages, and determining BAT is a very large and complicated process. It takes a lot of effort, intense effort, in a fairly short period of time. Terms have to be agreed, and then the framework and timescales laid out. From there, governance groups and technical working groups who do the majority of the work have to be formed. Representation from industry at this stage is absolutely essential, as the current performance of the industry against existing BREFs and permit conditions is reviewed. Now, industry, as we know, are the real experts in operating processes, and as part of this process for going for a BREF, installations have to report emissions, raw material usage, water, energy consumption, waste outputs, and all of these are collated to create a range of thresholds that could be acceptable, and from there emissions limits are determined. If any industry that's subject to a BREF doesn't get engaged with the process, it can't realistically argue if irrational limits, for want of a better phrase, are imposed on it. Once a BREF's agreed, the authorities have 4 years to get all permits reviewed and updated and reissued to the businesses to which they affect. But the actual BREF process itself can take anywhere between 28 and 48 months to achieve at the present moment in time. So changes can take years to come into effect. After the permit's revised, there's currently a 4-year period for an installation to comply with the new permit. However, if anyone's thinking of building a brand new foundry tomorrow, from day one, when that permit is issued, you would have to meet all of the conditions in that permit. There would not be that 4-year period. Whether the UK review period will actually happen any quicker as a result of doing our own thing isn't known, but we hope it will. The conditions in your permit should tell you what BAT you should be using in relation to your unique process, because every foundry is different, even those undertaking the same thing as one half a mile down the road. Or it might tell you just the emission limits you need to set, determined on BAT. If your permit doesn't state what BAT you need to use, you'll have to decide for yourself based on the conditions imposed in the permit and the threshold for levels of pollution. When an individual business is subject to review by its regulator or authority, it can propose alternative operating techniques to suggested BAT from the people setting the permit. After all, BAT can't be a one-size-fits-all, because every foundry is as different as every snowflake that ever falls from the sky. But you'll need to explain to the person setting this permit for you how your proposal will meet the BAT associated emission level as part of that review. They won't necessarily agree with you, but you do have the right to say, we want to do something different because we think we can achieve the same aims. So what does the future look like in terms of setting it? Well, the UK government and the devolved administrations have all stated that they're committed to providing a regime for the development of BAT for the UK. A consultation is currently underway on a framework which in their words states a clear process for collating and sharing technical views, determining new BAT and ensuring that both BAT and the process for determining BAT is evaluated. As you can see, they like to put the word BAT in at every opportunity. The responses will then be used to create the new UK system. Now, the consultation opened in January this year, and the CMS routinely been sending out reminders to people about this. We had a meeting about the response yesterday with some of our members. The submission deadline is 11:45 p.m. this coming Sunday, the 18th of April. The CMF is going to put a response in on behalf of industry as a whole, and from the trade association perspective, but any companies allowed to submit their own individual response. And on the bottom of the screen, you can see the actual direct link that's there if you want to put your own response in. As it stands at the moment, what's likely to change as a result of the consultation? Probably not a lot on first glance. The government said it wants to develop and set future BAT based on the same principles we have followed since the concept was devised. Whether they will stick to that or not, however, remains to be seen. One of the proposed changes is that each devolved administration could be allowed to define its own BAT emission level values. So these could look different between each nation in the UK. Now, this won't help industry, and it may produce a distorted approach to protecting the environment. Furthermore, it has the potential to put viable businesses at risk in certain parts of the country, depending on what the administrations do. Now, one of the downsides to Bref is it's a very rigid document. And as industry moves forward at pace, as it always does, new and emerging techniques referenced in current Brefs either become mainstream or are found not to work and they fade away. However, for as long as this Bref is live, up until the next review, they still sit there as live options the regulator can consider for individual businesses. New and more effective techniques for reducing emissions also develop between Brefs from suppliers with their products and from businesses themselves, and again, these don't get captured until the next revision. So if you do make changes, if you do see improvements and it's going to take you away from your current permit, you need to make sure that you're actually working with the permitting authority quite closely so they know what you want to do and why, so you can get your permit adjusted to meet the environmental challenges. Now, this is really important for those businesses who are also accredited to environmental standards or sustainability standards, because you will have KPIs and objectives and targets that you have to set for improving your environmental performance. But overall, how does this actually relate to today and then into net zero? As the green agenda intensifies and work towards net zero gathers momentum, further changes and new BAT are likely to be included. Brefs themselves might start to focus on how business can adapt to use existing but more efficient and less energy intensive technologies, even if not fully recognised as BAT, such as more efficient furnaces or changes to moulding techniques. A key point to note now is the government are considering holding public consultations on outcomes. We all need to understand, what do they mean by the word public? Does this mean open to the general public? Because as with most things, unless you're intimately involved with something and learn to understand the technicalities and the nuances of it, including making potentially significant changes, opinions can easily be misled. So all industries that are affected by Bref and by BAT will probably need to look to do a better job at selling themselves on their environmental performance. And as Pam has already alluded to, what would happen if these products can no longer be made in the UK and they have to be bought in from overseas? Over time, as government moves forward, horizon scanning suggests that we might see BAT being increasingly bought in for smaller Part B and Part C facilities as well. What incentives, such as a continuation of the super deduction or grants coming back into the mainstream for development and upgrades to plant and equipment to give environmental benefits as opposed just for innovation alone, remain to be seen. I hope this has given you a useful oversight. I appreciate I've gone through a lot of things pretty quickly. The details for everything is actually very highly complicated. There is no way on the face of this planet they could ever be addressed in a single presentation. If you do have any questions you'd like to raise outside of the meeting, then my contact information will appear on a slide later in the presentation, along, of course, with the details of the other speakers from this event. So thank you for listening, and now back to Pam.
Thank you, Richard. So just while we're getting, sorry, Richard, the other Richard White, ready. I just, obviously we've got a couple of seconds for questions. The other thing I would like to just invite Bruce Adderley, if he wants to say a few words by way of introduction to himself as well, and obviously comment on anything that we've heard. And as Richard said, if you don't want to speak now, then obviously do contact us offline afterwards. So Bruce, I'll just come to you very briefly, and then we're straight over to you, Richard. All right?
Okay. Thanks very much, Pam. I just really wanted to say hello to you all, and encourage all of those of you that are thinking about things in the development and innovation space to contact us and make use of the challenge, the funding and support we've got available in that area. The challenge is well underway now. We've run a couple of calls for innovation projects, and there's more calls coming up this year. Literally tomorrow, something opens for any of you who are small and medium-sized companies who may have innovations to take forward and possibly looking for venture capital investors as well. There's a special scheme for that. In the summer, we're going to be running a call for smaller scale projects, so that the sort of tens and hundreds of thousands of level scale. And then at the back end of the year, we're going to be launching a call for really quite significant pilot scale projects, where we're expecting those projects to be certainly above £5 million in scale and take 2 years or more to complete, and could be approaching 10 million at the upper end. So there's a lot of scope. I will make sure that Pam and her team have all the relevant details about getting in touch with us, although of course you can find us via the web. And we do offer a route to innovation support, especially for those of you who maybe not attempted to do an innovation project in the past, but thinking about it the first time and need some help. We're here to help you do that as well, and that's really important. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them, or we can speak separately another time.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. I think there was a problem with the link apparently on the last screen, but I've just popped it into the chat as well. So if anybody wants that, obviously contact the office as well. This is for the consultation, which as Richard Heath mentioned, is closing at the weekend. So I can't see any hands up or anybody turning green to ask questions. So what I'll do then is I'll hand over to Richard White. Thank you, Bruce. Richard, then over to you.
Lovely, thanks, Pam. Can you see my screen?
We can, thank you. Yeah. Well, I can.
First of all. Okay. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Richard White from LG Energy Group, and I'm going to run through some of the basics and a bit of the detail of net zero carbon, carbon net zero, kind of which way around you like to pronounce it, and just to explain sort of what it is, where it comes from, what can be done, and some sort of general guidance on it. As I go through, if you feel that anything I've said needs clarification, then please do feel free to query it as we go, or if you've got any sort of more specific questions, then by all means hold them to the end and we'll deal with them then. Okay, so hopefully you all know who we are by now. We're the energy and consultancy partner to the Cats Metals Federation. So I won't dwell on us for too long, but what is a net zero carbon organisation? First of all, so some definitions. So it's one that in the first instance is highly energy efficient.
and is fully powered from renewable sources, either on-site generated or off-site renewables imported onto site. So I think the one thing to highlight from that is it's not just about offsetting your renewables, it is about being a highly energy efficient organisation in the first place, because we'll touch on the idea of offsetting and cheating, as some people see it later on. So it's about being energy efficient and non-carbon emitting on balance, I guess. So the background to this drive for net zero, because it seems to be on everybody's agenda at the minute, it is the Paris Agreement, famously signed up to by all major countries of the world, and then Trump's America pulled out of it, but they're expected to now rejoin. And what it is, it's a commitment to keeping the global temperature rise to under 2 degrees, and ideally to under 1.5 degrees. So if you hear anybody talking about science-based targets within carbon net zero, that's about targets that aim to ensure that those figures are not hit in this instance, because it's a temperature rise. So we have science-based targets which mean they align with that 1.5 degree limit. But that's, I suppose, a more extreme version of net zero carbon. You don't have to abide by science-based targets. The reasons to go ahead with it, first and foremost, to reduce your energy emissions and cost. Increasingly, supply chain pressures, both sort of upstream and downstream. There's an expectation now on businesses to do so. There's the sort of CSR and conscientious factor of environmental protection, and then there's something the older Greta Thunberg or her buddies paying you a visit. But again, I think that her influence on this can be joked about, but I think it does show how it's got into the public's mind very strongly in the last few years. So, in terms of what a sort of net zero pathway looks like for a business, probably the most important thing to talk about is the scopes of emissions. So you may well have seen these before. You probably have. We have scopes 1, 2, and 3. Now you can literally spend, and don't worry, I'm not going to, but you could spend about an hour talking about scope 3 emissions. So I'll try to cover them off briefly. Scope 1 is easy. So it's direct emissions from your site, which is pretty much gas for most, or vehicle emissions, or any diesel generators you might have for emergency use. Scope 2, again, relatively simple, purchase electricity. You don't emit the emissions for electricity on site, but you're wholly responsible for the consumption of electricity on site, which has associated emissions. So scope 1 and 2, nice and easy. Scope 3 is everything else, really. I think the thing to point out is your scope 3 emissions as a business will be somebody else's scope 1 and 2. So some businesses choose to limit their scope 3 as movement of people and product, water consumption, and waste management and recycling. There are various definitions of what is and what isn't scope 3, but there's no right or wrong definitions. But the supply chain element is where it comes into it. So it's the carbon footprint, if you like, of your supply chain. So everything that comes to your site, raw materials, to stationery, will have its own carbon footprint. Now, you can't be responsible for the carbon footprint of everything downstream and everything upstream. So we need to draw boundaries of what is and what isn't included in what you capture and report in this. So I won't go into any more detail on it, because like I said, it's quite a complex subject, the scope 3. But it's about drawing a boundary about what can you measure, what can you control or influence, and then equating a carbon output to that, which you do by all sorts of conversion factors, which are fairly standard for electricity, but might be you know, unique to the type of metals that are imported, the type of product that comes into site, but they can all be quantified and turned into a carbon output. So that's your start position, that's your line in the sand, your carbon footprint of your organisation and your supply chain, however you want to draw it. There isn't any legislation at the moment that says you have to adopt a net zero strategy. Obviously the country as a whole has adopted one, or at least has a target. I'm not sure it has a strategy just yet. But there, of course, there are various bits of legislation that many of you may comply with already, which will support this. So ESOS requires you to audit and you know, look at least, and have to implement them, energy reduction measures. SECR, which everybody's now getting to grips with. Again, if you're caught by it, this requires you to capture scope 1 and 2 carbon footprint information that we just looked at. So that requires you to report it, doesn't require you to reduce it. And scope 3 emissions are optional in SECR, but it does therefore sort of suggest that SECR is a good place to start, because it's something you already have to do. You have to report it annually. So perhaps how can you use SECR as a platform to report and manage energy a little bit further. And any of you in climate change agreements already have an incentive and a structure to report and reduce your energy consumption per ton of product. So therefore, you probably have an energy strategy within your climate change agreement. So all of those things together all support this overall message. There isn't legislation to say you have to do it, but there's lots of legislation that provides a good platform for it. So in terms of what that pathway might look like, we've got our various little people here ranging from no idea what to do to we think we've got everything done in hand. But wherever you are on that sort of scale, you still need to identify what needs to be done. So we need to do the footprinting exercise, identify the opportunities, start running projects. They require design and finance, and then obviously building, and once they're built, operation and maintenance, and then you're continually optimizing and feeding that information back in to the beginning. So it's a sort of cyclical approach to energy management, but it's trying to have as an output of that projects implemented to make carbon savings, and by carbon savings, typically cost savings, and then reinvesting those cost savings back into the next step in the chain. So it's all very well saying, well, we're going to be net zero by 2035 or 2040 or whatever date might be set, but what you then need is a plan to say, okay, well, what do we need to do? When will we do these things? What will we concentrate on first? If we can save money doing X, then within 5 years, can we then afford to go on to Y? And then reduce energy through those measures to leave you with what will inevitably be an amount of energy still that has to be consumed. You can reduce and reduce and reduce, but you can't eliminate the need for energy consumption, of course. So we'll come on to what we do with the remnants later on. Technologies are constantly changing and evolving, and over time, more carbon efficient technologies are becoming available to us. So you can have a look at that, and we'll share the slides afterwards. I'm not going to read all these out to you, of course, but yeah, there are things on there like hydrogen, which is talked about a lot as one for the future, but and hopefully potentially it will be. It's certainly not one for the present, but it would solve a lot of the problems that we have with gas and heating were it to become available. Electric vehicles are very much something that we've gone past the tipping point of. They will be part of the plan in the coming years, of course. And then you've got sort of on-site generation, solar and so on, which are very much well-established technologies. So it's a constantly moving area, and increasingly more energy efficient technologies come on board, and we need to adopt those and bring them into that plan as they become financially viable as well as logistically viable. And what that might look like in a sample building, this is really just to demonstrate there are areas that are beyond your control, but certainly very much influence your carbon footprint, which is stuff like the makeup of grid electricity. And the greener that gets, then of course that's doing some of the hard work for us. Through to the building itself, and as well as outside influences like financing, cost of money, of course, is a factor in these projects. And the operation and maintenance of existing kit and infrastructure can have a factor as well. So everybody's probably seen one of these. This is your sort of start point in any of these projects. The energy audit with the costs paybacks. We'd normally have a carbon saving on here somewhere. That column seems to have fallen off. But this will be the sort of start point to prioritise which projects we look at now, which we earmark for the future, and which perhaps get ruled out because they don't offer the rewards for the cost involved. Payback criteria, everybody will have set ones. A lot of people like to have everything under 2 years, some under 3. The idea of looking at something like this over a longer term period of, again, over the next 15, 20 years, we're going to achieve X, will hopefully support the implementation of longer term projects. And certainly that's the idea, that if you make a longer term commitment, then you can't expect to then be doing everything with 18-month to 2-year paybacks. And the more seriously you take that commitment, of course, the more willing you may be to stretch those the duration and the payback durations of the projects involved. And of course, some of the bigger projects that will have the biggest influence on your energy consumption might be the larger investment ones and the longer paybacks, but they will get you or take more steps towards that end goal. So in terms of sort of technologies and practical applications, these are only examples, it's by no means exhaustive. We've got stuff like LED lighting, which again everybody will have looked at, but still there are a lot of opportunities there. Voltage optimization, proven technology, not so good with inductive load, so perhaps not suitable for all applications within cast metal, certainly, but it can be used in a targeted way. Building management systems and automated control is a good way of getting to, I suppose, ruling out that human element. But are they managed properly? Are the set points set to current requirements, and constant review of building management systems is quite a quick and easy win. On-site generation, solar PV, for most it's never going to provide all of your on-site energy requirement, but it can make a significant dent in it. It is very green, it is very simple technology and reliable. And there are various ways that it can be funded, either through self-finance or through a power purchase agreement, where you simply pay for the energy that comes from the solar PV at a discounted rate to grid. So it's a nice, easy and simple win. CHP, combined heat and power, or straight gas engines, don't sit very well on a net zero carbon plan, because it's typically more burning of gas. But again, hydrogen might start to have an influence on there. It is very commercially viable at the minute. But if you have the heat requirement, then it can be a suitable alternative to gas boilers, where you utilise the electricity at the same time. And in that instance, certain times it can be carbon efficient as well. We don't see so much onshore wind these days. It can still be viable, but there's an increasing push for all that to be offshore. So that's more likely to be brought in via PPA than on site. And a lot of talk about batteries, but of course batteries aren't themselves green or generating, but they do help with sort of smoothing loads, and they can help with renewable output for wind and solar. again, saving energy that's generated renewably to be used when it's needed. So batteries will have a role to play, but they're not ultimately energy reducing. Behaviour change, again, comes in waves. It's been looked at before, it's been driven throughout the years, but ultimately it's the people on site who are in charge of the energy usage, and so they need to be engaged in this. They need to be aware of the targets, the expectations, and they need to be motivated and educated in terms of energy usage to the point where they're able to influence energy consumption, drive it down, and support the overall drive. And there's lots and lots of evidence and case studies of excellent sort of behaviour change campaigns and hearts and minds campaigns and that sort of thing. But that certainly can't be ignored. I said I would come around to sort of offsetting. So what's left when the energy that's you've done everything you can to be as efficient as possible. You're still going to have imported electricity and for the time being at least imported gas. So you can look at power purchase agreements, which is basically purchasing green energy that's traced back to source, and therefore you know that all the electricity that you consume has been generated by renewable sources, and therefore doesn't come with a carbon footprint as such. You can look at on-site renewables, which I briefly mentioned, but you could look at overspecking and exporting to cover consumption at other sites. That can be done as well. So power that's exported to grid, you get what are called REGOs, REGO, so Renewable Energy Guarantee of Origin. Every kilowatt hour of generated green electricity gets one of these. When you purchase green electricity, that's effectively what you're buying. But if you generate your own electricity, you will receive REGOs, and you can then surrender those to cover the consumption at another site that might not be green, which is a form of offsetting, sort of carbon offsetting really. It's allowing a trace from the kilowatt hour that you consume to the kilowatt hour generated. And there are offsetting schemes available now that are accredited ones that will cover the carbon cost of anything. So most often used for gas, because there's not a lot of green gas like there is green electricity, but they can be used to offset emissions for anything within scope 3 as well. So in order to get ultimately to net zero, you will need to do some form of offsetting, certainly at present and until technology catches up. So in terms of the sort of what next, if you like, it's a case of establish the scope and the aim. So what do you intend to do and by when? But most importantly, I think some companies don't start or haven't started because they can't quite figure out exactly what to cover, exactly what to capture, exactly how to capture that information. How do you convert waste information to carbon or raw material imports into carbon? I would say I wouldn't worry too much about that because the scope probably will change over time. And it's more important to be doing something than to be spending time worrying about the details of what you may or may not be doing in 5, 10, 15, 20 years time. So establish a scope and accept that it might change, so that you can start on the project, start with the target. So that will give you a carbon footprint of the organization. And then identify the suitable projects and prioritize them based on the impact they'll have on your carbon footprint and the investment required. It may be planning in future projects based on the savings from earlier projects, but set out those priorities with timelines. Communicate that once it's done heavily internally and externally. Tell people what you're going to do. Make sure all staff are aware of the aims, because a lot of the benefit of this is to present yourself as a green or a green-minded organisation, or it might be we're not a green organisation, but this is what we're doing in order to become more green. So communication of this is key, particularly up and down the supply chain, and then regular review and reporting of the progress, which if you're caught by things like SECR and ESOS, you will be regularly reviewing your carbon footprint anyway. But to review, report, and then adjust if necessary the plan. And as technologies change, as cost of money changes, as paybacks change, continue to adjust all of those things. Continue to review all of those things so you can adjust your plan accordingly. But to start doing something is better than to wait, because it appears too daunting, I would say. And the carbon footprint exercise at the beginning can and will change. So again, scope 1 and 2 within SECR, everybody's reporting. That will gradually build into scope 3. So people will be reporting a different carbon footprint in 5 or 10 years' time to what they're reporting now. So I wouldn't let that stop you. So that was that's the end of the slides. So if anybody has any questions or anything that I've not covered, then please shout. I'll be happy to come up.
Great. Thank you very much, Richard. I'm really grateful that you've taken the time to join and to speak to our members today. I mean, as we've said, this is quite a challenging thing for us all to deal with. And just a note for Bruce Adderley, I think who's probably still listening, it's worth mentioning that obviously what we do really in our businesses is make castings, not manage our energy, obviously, but it's an important part of the cost. And also the important point again to make is that a lot of our businesses are relatively small, so they're SMEs. And the challenge of some of this cannot be underestimated, really. I think we're very aware of this, certainly from ourselves as the Trade Association, but also, as I mentioned before, as part of the wider UK Metals Council. I think it is a big challenge. I think that the government are putting money in through the TFI, and have stated that they don't want to export our carbon footprint. So I think we just have to take them at their word, but effectively we just need to keep lobbying. So I've got a bit of background noise, I think, is coming out. I'm presuming, Andrew Tagg, you wanted to say something, given that you've gone vocal?
Yeah, if I can. I mean, sorry, I'm not far from where I'm in a car. The two things question I want to ask. One is on the, obviously our industry is small, and it's a small industry, but the difference is per turnover. The percentage of turnover or value added as energy is quite high, so it does have a major impact on the industry is small. But the question I want to ask is, the biggest hit's going to be, or difficult thing to change, is going to be people using natural gas. Obviously, a lot of the people use electric energy. As he said, the greenification of the grid's going to do something for them. The question I want to ask: are the government going to support focusing the distribution of digested methane to industries that would find the transition more difficult? So, example, people have got gas-fired, and it's going to probably hit more the aluminium industry rather than the iron industry, because most iron foundries these days are electric melting. Are they going to be able to purchase the digested methane as a council or ex-council? I know how most local authorities now are running major digestion facilities for food waste, and that's creating digested methane. Is that going to be a source of energy that the farmers could pull on as a net carbon zero energy?
In theory, yes. I would say in practice, the take up of biogas from anaerobic digestion, it's going on, and as you rightly said, quite a few local authorities have their own plants, but it's quite a it's a tricky technology. It's one that that is never never without its issues, because it's like a live system that needs sort of balancing and feeding. So
I understand that.
Yeah. So commercially, they're not great. In theory, yes, you can, and this does happen. You can inject biogas into the grid, but to answer your question, would it happen at sufficient volumes?
Well, what I'm getting at is that if you take the fuel called biofuels, there seems to be no policy to focus the use or production of biofuel into sectors that would benefit from. I'll give you an example, right? The classic example is biodiesel and biokerosene. We all accept that the ground transport is an easier thing to electrify than aerospace, correct? There seems to be no government policy to say, okay, all bio production of fuels should go towards the system that would find it harder to electrify. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's stupid producing biodiesel when you could electrify transport much easier, ground transport, than trying to make an airline that fly off batteries. Do you follow what I'm getting at? So it seems to be there's no focus to say that bio natural methane will be a focus facility for industries that will benefit more from that. Is there a case to argue this to the government?
Potentially, but what you're doing with that is like what happens with electricity, where you create an audit trail between the user and the generator. And in this instance, it would be for biogas, rather than physically transporting the biogas to where it's needed. It would be probably via a sort of credit system where somebody injects biogas into the grid, you take gas out, and you equate the two.
Correct.
But the levels of biogas injection into the grid are quite low, and some of the reasons for that are economic, because the cost of electricity is so high. It often makes more sense to use that biogas for green electricity generation than it does.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, a lot of the aluminium foundries use, melting aluminium under gas is quite an efficient process, right? Compared to, in some cases, it'll mean either if there's no availability, they'll have to switch to electric to melt the aluminium. And that's a capital cost. If there was some form of understanding that they could purchase this material, right, through a credit system, then it may make the viability of biogas more viable. You can see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think this is probably a wider issue than we can. Perhaps it's more about a government policy issue, that perhaps we sort of pick up separately. I don't know whether there's any other. So thank you, Andrew, for that. I don't know whether there's any other questions that anybody wants to raise. Otherwise, I mean, I think we're coming up to about 10 o'clock. I think, as I say, 11 o'clock. I think there's been a really useful discussion. I would just emphasise the fact that, if you have questions about starting to look at some of these areas, then don't feel that you're on your own. Obviously Richard and his team at LG, as our strategic sort of energy partners, can help with a lot of this. I think also questions around the wider strategy, policy and things like that, certainly keep us informed of any ideas, because we can feed those in to government, and we can also feed them in through the UK Metals Council, which is obviously a pretty powerful voice, being one of the key sectors. So is there anything else that anyone would like to ask? As I say, the contact details for all of us are on the screen. You have got the opportunity to contribute to the consultation, but admittedly the deadline is fairly tight now, because the submissions have to be in by the end of Sunday.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Richard, what potentially can be done in terms of getting the non-commodity charges down on the bills, because that is the biggest thing that really kills people as far as electricity prices go.
Yeah, Okay, it's a yeah, a very good question, but I'm not sure my answer will satisfy you much. So in terms of not paying the non-commodity elements, there are probably only two routes. One is the EII, which, you know, if you qualify for that, then you're very you're fortunate. And the most energy intensive industries can, but for everybody else, it's very, very difficult to avoid it. And yeah, even sort of triad avoidance, which many have been doing, is now being taken away as an option as well after this winter. There is one other route, and I probably won't go into loads of detail now, but if you can purchase micro-generated electricity, small scale, typically renewable electricity directly from a generator, there is potentially a way round there, because small generators or energy bought from small suppliers and generators doesn't carry a lot of those non-commodity elements. It's not an easy thing to do, and it's not something I can necessarily that you can definitely do, but that is the only other route other than EII to avoiding non-commodity costs.
Yeah, and I think it's worth adding that obviously a lot of our members were not eligible under the criteria that the government set for the energy-intensive industries. Most of our members weren't eligible, but I think you know, as you say, on-site generation is something that people certainly look at, and I know you're happy to talk to people about that as well. But of course, that might start to be flagged up as you know, as something that government want to start looking at. So that's always the risk. But at the moment, as you say, I think it's an option, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the justification that's always used for increasing the non-commodity cost is, well, the more expensive we make electricity, the more we justify or the more we encourage energy reduction, because the only way to truly avoid all of this is not to use the energy in the first place, which I know you've heard that 1,000 times before, but that's the
and again, I think where we're batch melting, where we're transporting metal around in sometimes quite old buildings, where we've got heat, we've got banks of castings cooling. I know certainly some of our members have done some useful work in recovering energy, but it's by no means necessarily very straightforward or very easy when you're retrofitting a lot of this stuff. So I think that's certainly, I mean, that will certainly be something I would expect or anticipate that would be picked up by TFI, the Transforming Foundation Industries, and some of this collaborative project work. But I think that has to be, and Bruce is nodding at that, which is good. But of course, it's that's hugely capital intensive. I mean, we've got a slight. I mean, it's great that there's this double discount, if you like, on capital allowances at the moment. But we're saying to people, look, almost be careful before you invest, because we don't know what you're going to be using in 5 to 10 years time. So I think certainly something that we should be pushing for is an extension to that. So there's some tax incentives and some allowances for companies who really want to move towards net zero. So plenty of food for thought. And Bruce, did you want to pick up on anything on that before we just sort of finally wrap up? Just conscious of time, obviously.
Yeah, I mean,
Can I say so?
Can
we just hear from Bruce first, Andrew, and then we'll come to you.
Okay, I mean, just say that most of the things you've been talking about this morning can fall within the scope of what we can cover one way or another. And if it doesn't, we will try and find you the right route to go. I'm probably speaking to something you're well aware of, but of course, at the moment, the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund is out there and is open again. I think the call that's open at the moment for proposals closes back into June or into the beginning of July. So there's a bit of time. Now, obviously, that is focused at if you've got your current facility, so you're not looking to put down a new facility, but if you've got a current facility that you want to do more on in terms of improving your energy efficiency, then that's available right now to apply to. And there are tens and tens of millions of pounds available for companies through that route. So please take a look, and we can always help you pointing in the right direction there, because actually it's an Innovate UK team who are running that on behalf of BEIS.
Yeah, that's really useful, Bruce, actually. And I think I would echo those comments. I mean, you know, that our job is making castings, and our job is as a trade association is facilitating and networking and sort of supporting industry. We're not necessarily the experts on writing bids, but I think your team are clearly, and we've got very good links with a number of universities for whom this is their bread and butter, of course. And I think this leads into that discussion really around the business relevance of some of these initiatives, that they're not fundamental blue sky. This is actually applied technology, almost like a technology transfer. You know, and obviously, if any members out there want some help, then please do shout. So Andrew, I'll just come to you. Thank you, if I can.
Yeah, I just want to make a very quick statement. In my presentation on Monday night, I made one thing that is fundamentally we should focus on. We need to focus on energy consumption per unit of output. I think one thing we can do immediately without a lot of investment is improve our net process yield and improve our OEE of our plants. Just by doing that, we will reduce our energy footprint. You know, efficiency.
I think that's
we can do a lot. In my talk of the night, I did that because I know the industry isn't focused as high on that as what our competitors are, and that's because of a historically fairly cheap energy. If you go to people in Europe, especially Germany, they're much more focused on maximising unit output of each plant, and by doing that, you will reduce your energy footprint. And that's where we can start now, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Actually, I think this is multifaceted, isn't it? And it's you know, it's about investment, it's about energy efficiencies, it's about all sorts of things, really. I mean, I can see in the chat, you know, someone suggested that, and I think it's a good idea, is that we maybe have almost like a working group or a steering group that we pull together, some of you from industry and some of our experts from other fields as well, to start pulling together, because I think there will be several strands to this, and we're certainly keen to enable that facilitating. So that might be really useful for Bruce and his team as well, to sort of, you know, to be involved in some of those discussions, so you'll hear of some of the practical issues, and I'm sure there will be some really fundamental stuff that we need to do, but there's also some sharing of best practice and good practice, and maybe some of the, you know, the old ETSU guides that I remember, unfortunately, because I'm old enough to remember those back in the day, you know, where we had some really good practice, really practically applied you know, guides that foundries could really offer you know, could follow a step-by-step process to really make a difference. So there's some good ideas there. I think I was conscious it's coming up to 11 o'clock. Does anybody else have any burning issues that they'd like to start? I say this has been a first off, and it's been a really useful and quite a broad discussion. And I think there's lots to do, and we need to build on this. Bruce, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, I just wanted to re-emphasise. Obviously, today's discussion has been very focused on energy as part of net zero. But as a challenge, we are also, alongside the energy efficiency piece, very much focused on the resource efficiency side, which Andrew, I hope, also links to what you said a moment ago. So we're very much open to proposals in that area as well, and yeah, would love to discuss with your members about that.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well, and absolutely, we've got particularly a quite a pressing project at the moment that we'd be happy to pick up with you at some point, you know, just to add to the to-do list, if you like. But you know, it's going to be a journey, isn't it, for all of us? Okay. Well, I think at that point, I'd like to really thank, obviously, Richard White, and also Richard Heath, and of course to Bruce as well for his contributions today. I think, you know, and all the comments and the contributions, and just for listening in, actually. I think this is going to be an exciting, if not challenging, few years for us all. But I think it's important that we fight to do whatever we can to keep our sovereign capability and our you know, and I think the government are recognising that actually having strategically significant industries in the UK is vitally important. So, sorry, I think Tony, is Tony waving at me or just talking to a colleague? He's probably ordering his lunch. That's fine. So thank you again for taking the time to join. And yeah, so great. Thanks for all those offers of support and input. Thanks again for joining. We'll share the slides and the presentation in the next few days for anyone who's missed it. But yeah, we'll look forward to speaking to you again in the near future. Thanks again. Bye bye.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Guys. Bye. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, bye.